Hi guys, hope you all doing well, and this will be the second video of the entire series that I'm going to create for Azure Active Directory. And in this video, we are going to talk about AAD Connect installation. So if you have watched our last video, in that video, I have discussed what is Azure Active Directory, how it is created, and why it is required for Microsoft cloud applications. I've also showcased how you can set up a trial tenant. A trial tenant is something which is very important because when you learn something and if you are able to reproduce the same in your lab or in your test environment, that will make a lot of sense in terms of understanding how a particular feature works. As per my recommendation, if you guys have watched the video which is moreover related to the identity model offered by Azure Active Directory, then whatever I'm going to explain in this particular video, that is going to make a lot of sense. If not, please watch that and then proceed with this particular video. The agenda for this particular video specifically will be knowing what is hybrid identity and how to set up hybrid identity and the installation of AAD Connect tool, which will actually help you to set up a hybrid identity model. Now, without any delay, let's understand what is hybrid identity model. So in our previous video, I've showcased that you subscribe for Office 365 trial tenant and you get the access to Azure Active Directory. But what if you want to sync all your user objects which are there in your on-prem Active Directory? In that cases or in these kind of scenarios, what you have to do is you have to use a tool called Azure AD Connect. Now, this is a free tool offered by Microsoft which will sync all your on-prem identities to Azure Active Directory. Now, when you log into portal.azure.com and create a user object from the portal itself, that account is called Cloud Identity. And when you will search for that particular account, the source for that user object will be listed as Azure Active Directory. This is something which I'm going to showcase you on the portal, and when I will show you, then it will make a lot of sense. The identities that you are syncing from on-prem to Azure Active Directory will be listed as Windows Server 80. Again, this is something which I will be showing you directly on the portal. But now the question comes, why should I sync my on-prem identities to Azure Active Directory? The answer to this is very simple, that let's say you have a user on-prem which is user@conceptswork.com and his password is abc@123. The moment you will sync this user object to Azure Active Directory, he or she will be able to sign in with the same username and password to those applications which you are provisioning for that particular user. So in Azure Active Directory, you can integrate n number of applications. By default, there are more than 16,000 applications which are available in Gallery. Apart from that, you can integrate your own application or your enterprise can integrate some in-house applications that you have, and that application can outsource the identity to Azure Active Directory. That's the fundamental of implementing hybrid identity model. That means there are some identities which are directly created in the cloud, and there are some identities which you have synced from on-prem to Azure Active Directory. Now, moving on with the setup part, the first thing that I would like to talk about will be the basics that you need to know before you proceed with the installation so that you can have an ideal setup wherein everything should work according to you. So before installing AAD Connect, the very first thing that you have to do is you have to add and verify your own domain. So in our case, it's conceptswork.com, and I have already added and verified my domain in my tenant. Now, the reason why I'm saying this, or what will happen if you will not verify your domain, let's say you have a user on-prem which has a UPN, user@conceptswork.com, and if your domain, your own domain is not verified in Azure Active Directory, the UPN of that particular user will get changed to user@aademstrial.onmicrosoft.com. The reason why I mentioned this here because this is our tenant wherein I will be able to showcase you everything when it comes to installation of AAD Connect and how the identities are getting synced to Azure Active Directory. The second thing that you have to make sure that the machine that you are using to install AAD Connect must be a domain joined machine, and it should be at least 2008 R2 or later. By default, when you create Azure Active Directory, you have a limit of creating up to 50K objects in Azure Active Directory. But the moment you verify your domain, this count gets increased up to 300K. To install AAD Connect, you need global admin credentials. And if you go by the default setup, that means, so there are two ways of installing AAD Connect, a custom and a default. And if you go by the default method, a SQL Express is installed on the same machine, which holds the database of all the operations which AAD Connect does as an application, and that has a limit of 10 GB. But if you think and if your enterprise has more than 100K objects, it is always recommended to install SQL instance or to use SQL instance with the installation. Now let's talk about the methods which are available which you can use to install AAD Connect. If you remember, I said in our second slide that when a user object is getting synced to Azure Active Directory, he or she can use the same username and password. Now, this is done when you install AAD Connect with password synchronization. That means the passwords from on-prem are synced to Azure Active Directory. In fact, the hash value of passwords are synced to Azure Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory would be able to cater the authentication for those particular user objects, and then the user can use same username and password to sign in to rest of the applications which you have already integrated in Azure Active Directory. So the fundamental of using password synchronization is that you don't want the authentication to be processed on-prem. Instead, authentication will be processed by Azure Active Directory as well as your domain is managed. Now, what is a managed domain? This is something which I have covered in identity model. I'm saying this again. If you have not watched that video, please go ahead and watch that video and then come back. The second option which you want to enable can be pass-through authentication. Now, in this option, or when you select this option, what happens that your domain remains managed, but your authentication will be processed on-prem because there are certain connectors which will be installed. Now, I have a separate video on pass-through authentication that will let you know each and everything which is required to know how pass-through authentication works, and I will be sharing that link in the description. After this video, watch pass-through authentication video. The last option which is there is called federation. That means you can have federated identities. Now, what does this mean? That there is an identity provider on-prem that could be ADFS or Ping Federate that will process the authentication and will send a token to Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory will accept that token and provide a new token to the respective application for which Azure Active Directory is acting as an identity provider. Now, this is not complicated. I know I have used a very big statement to address this kind of installation, but don't worry, I have also covered ADFS with Office 365 in a separate video, and I will be sharing that link in the description as well. And I'm pretty much sure the moment you watch that video, you'll get an idea what I'm saying right now. For this video, just understand these are three methods which you can use to install AAD Connect. Now, when you install AAD Connect, there are three accounts that are used by AAD Connect as an application, and the first one is msol underscore some GUID. Now, the purpose of this account is to go ahead and query all the objects from your on-prem AD. That means since your on-prem accounts are getting synced to Azure Active Directory, there must be a service account which should have the privilege to read all this information. And this is the purpose of this particular account, which you can find when you will check the properties of your local AD connector. I will be showcasing all this when we'll proceed with the demo. The second account that gets created will be sync underscore some GUID. This will be created in Azure Active Directory. So the first account that is getting listed here, that will be created on-prem. The second account that is getting listed here will be created in Azure Active Directory. And the purpose of the second account will be querying all the information which is there in Azure Active Directory, likewise read and write operations, which will be done to Azure Active Directory depending upon the information that's coming from on-prem. The last account which gets created is service account. Now, this is a very important concept which you have to understand, and that is that AAD Connect is an application that is going to do a lot of operations and it is going to maintain a database. So AAD Connect is going to write some information on that particular database. Now, this is the service account which is used to write all that information in the particular database. So this was all about knowing the theoretical part, which is moreover related to the installation of AAD Connect. Now what I'll do is I'll switch to my VM where we will be installing AAD Connect. So this is my machine, which is domain controller as well, but for your production and for your test environments, I would recommend you to use a different machine if you have. If you don't have, then you can use the same machine, which is your domain controller. But make sure when you are using a different machine, the AAD Connect server should be able to communicate to your local AD or your domain controller. Now, in order to proceed with the installation, the very first thing that we need is the setup file. And for that, what I'll do is I'll go to portal.azure.com and I will sign in with my global admin credentials. So now I'm going to click on Azure Active Directory and then I'll click on AAD Connect. And as you can see, I'm getting the option of download Azure AD Connect. The moment I will click on this, the setup file will be downloaded, for which you can click here. And once the setup file is downloaded, then we'll proceed with the installation. So as you can see, the setup file is now downloaded and I'll click on this file to launch the setup. Now, this is the process wherein the setup is getting installed. That means the application installation process is completed. And once the installation process will be completed, you will be redirected to do configuration. That means we'll proceed with configuring everything that we have discussed in the theoretical part of AAD Connect installation. Now I'll click on this icon and as you can see, the first screen that I'm getting is asking me to just accept the terms and conditions. I'll click on this and I'll click on continue. Now, as I said before, that there are two methods of installing AAD Connect. The first one is express setting and the other one is custom. When you select this option, password sync will be enabled for you. All the objects from on-prem will be synced as well as all the attributes from on-prem will be synced. I'm talking about the default set of attributes which are required to be synced to Azure Active Directory, and auto upgrade for Azure AD Connect will also be enabled. If I select this option, I will not get a lot of details which I can explain you and which is moreover related to the entire setup. So I'll choose the option of customize and then we'll proceed with the setup. So the first screen that I'm getting right now is asking for four options. The first one is specify a custom installation location. If I click on this option, you can see the default folder which gets created when you install AAD Connect. But if you want to choose a different location, just specify that location from this particular tab. The second option is saying use an existing SQL server. So I have explained the scenario when you will require a full SQL server when you have more than 100k objects. If you don't have more than 100k objects, don't select this option. Then the next option is use an existing service account. So the third account that we were discussing, the account which is actually used to write the information into the database which Azure AD Connect use as an application. If you want, you can create one account in your AD and you can specify that account here. The fourth option that you see here is moreover related to three different groups which are created once AAD Connect is installed. So you can have custom groups as well created in AD. So once you'll specify them here, instead of AAD Connect creating new groups, it will use the group that you have specified. Now these are four different kind of groups which have different privileges to access AAD Connect as an application. I'll be sharing a link in the description which you can review that lists all the purpose and all the functions which are moreover related to each one of these groups. So I'm not going to select any of these options because our setup will be fairly simple because we'll be knowing how the installation process works. Once we move on with the advanced videos that I will be creating for AAD Connect, then I'm going to discuss this option of custom sync groups. At this particular moment, I'm just going to click on. So now the options that I'm getting is what kind of method would you like to choose to proceed with the setup? So the first one is password hash synchronization, wherein the password hash from on-premise sync to Azure Active Directory so that your users can use same username and password. Second one is pass-through authentication is done on-prem, but your domain remains managed. These two are related to the federation. And the last one says do not configure. This means what? That your identities will be synced to Azure Active Directory, but you will be giving a different password manually to those identities which you are syncing from on-prem to Azure Active Directory, provided your domain is managed. Now, there is one more scenario wherein you select this option, and that is when you already have ADFS and you don't want ADFS to be deployed from AAD Connect server, then you can select this option and you can set up a federation trust between Azure Active Directory and your ADFS server. So for these two options and for pass through, I have already created a video which is there in the description. So for this video, I'm going to select the option of password hash synchronization, and I'm going to select the option of enable single sign-on. Now I'm going to click on next, and as you can see, I'm getting the option of signing in with my global admin credential. So I'm typing my global admin credential. What this will do is this will enable directory sync for my tenant so that all the on-prem identities can be synced to Azure Active Directory. It's showing bad password. Let me try again. Okay, so there is a typo. Trial. Next. Now, the moment you'll click on next, your global admin credentials will be verified, and then you can proceed with the options that you have to customize for your on-prem directory. That means choosing which OUs you want to sync to Azure Active Directory, which domain would you like to add. So right now, as you can see that the domain controller is associated with the domain called conceptswork.com, and this is the same machine. So I got this option to select add directory. The moment I'll click on this, now this is a very important screen and you should pay attention to this. It is asking me to provide my enterprise admin credential, but this doesn't mean that the credential that I'm giving right now will be used always with the rest of the process. The purpose of this enterprise admin credential is to create one account that is named as msol underscore some GUID. So this means what? That when I will give my enterprise admin credential here, that credentials will be used to create a new user object, and that user object will be associated with the local AD connector that is going to query all the information from your on-prem Active Directory. So now I'm going to type my username and password, which is the enterprise admin of my directory, and then I'll click on OK. So as you can see right now that there was a request that has been made by this particular application, which is AAD Connect, just to check that whether it can contact the domain controller of Active Directory, whereas the enterprise admin credentials are also verified. And now when I'll click on next, then I'll get the option to choose Azure AD sign in. Now what does this mean? That if you remember, I told you that if your domain is not verified, the UPN of the user will get changed to the current name of your tenant. That means if it is aademstrial.onmicrosoft.com, the UPN of user from user@conceptswork.com will get changed to user@aademstrial.onmicrosoft.com. So make sure that when you install AAD Connect, your domain should be verified. Now, this option that you see here, this actually means that which attribute from your on-prem directory should be used by users to sign in to portal.office.com or portal.azure.com. In many of the enterprise, the email and UPN are different. So if you're selecting email here, make sure the suffix of your email, the domain suffix of your email should be verified in Azure Active Directory. If you're selecting UPN, make sure the UPN suffix should be verified in Azure Active Directory. Now I'll click on next, and now I'm getting the option to filter the OUs. This means what? If you don't want all the OUs from your on-prem Active Directory to be synced to the cloud, you can actually come here and filter them. I'm not going to make any change here. I'm going to select the default option and then I'll click on next. Okay, so the first section that you see here, that's actually used when you have Exchange hybrid environment as well. That means you have account and resource forest. And the second section that you see here is actually the section which will help you to define a primary key attribute for a particular user object. Now let's discuss about this a little more because this is very important. So in a nutshell, there is a user object which is of a particular class and that is going to have different attributes predefined, but there must be one single attribute that should never be changed throughout the life cycle of that particular object. The same concept goes with Azure Active Directory as well. And when you are syncing on-prem identities, there is one attribute that is selected as source anchor, or there is one more term that you guys might have heard will be immutable ID. So by default, uh, the parameter which was selected was object GUID, but lately this has been changed almost a year back, and now MSDS consistency GUID is the attribute that will be used by the setup. But in a nutshell, what it does that it copies the value of object GUID of a particular object and then saves it back to MSDS consistency GUID. Things will make a lot of sense when I will show you the first sync of this particular installation getting completed, and then I'll show you how the values are copied from one attribute to another attribute. For this particular screen, if you don't have Exchange hybrid environment, use the first option and here select the option of let Azure manage the source anchor. Now there is one more thing which I would like to address here, and that is if this is your first setup, then this option is not going to make any difference. You can proceed with this option. But if you have already installed AAD Connect and you are reinstalling, then there must be some attribute which is already defined as an anchor attribute in Azure Active Directory or in your AAD Connect tool, make sure you select the same option. A real-time use case for this will be that most of the enterprise, they keep employee ID as a primary key attribute, and there could be a possibility that they might have selected employee ID as an attribute here to proceed with source anchor. So if employee ID or if any of the attribute has already been selected, make sure that you select that attribute from here. Don't proceed with the default setup. So since this is our first setup, I'll just click on next with the default options. Now, there is one more filter which you can apply, and that is a group filter. This is something which has been suggested for pilot environments, again for test environments. For production, don't do this, because this is a sort of one more layer of filtering that's been done when the objects are getting synced to Azure Active Directory. Now, what do I mean by this? That let's say you have 5 OUs and each OU contain 3 objects. You only selected 3 OUs. So 3 OUs with 3 objects, that means total 9 objects. So if you will not define any group here, those 9 objects will get synced to the cloud. But let's say out of those 9 objects, 5 objects belong to a specific group that you have selected here, then the remaining 4 objects will not be synced to Azure Active Directory. That's the purpose of this particular option. I'll click on next, and now I'm getting all the features which can be enabled by Azure AD Connect. Now, if you have observed that these two options and these two options are not highlighted right now. Now, the reason for group write back, exchange, make public folders, and exchange hybrid deployment not getting highlighted because the schema of my current domain controller is not extended for exchange. And device write back is a different feature that requires a lot of theoretical part to be finished first. So for this, I will be creating a different video. But as of now, just enable password hash synchronization. And if you want, you can click on any of these icons here. And if you want to read more, you can go ahead and read the theoretical part. But device write back is something that itself requires at least 3 videos, and I will be covering that as well very soon. So that's all. We have selected password hash synchronization, and now I'll click on next. The next screen that you will see will be asking you to provide domain admin credential of the domain that you have specified here. That means the first step where we added our domain is conceptswork.com, and again we have to verify the domain admin credential. Now there is a reason behind that, that this forest can have multiple domains, and in order to serve single sign-on for all the domains, there is a particular account that gets created, and I will be showing you that as well in the computers OU of your AD, and that account will be used to provide seamless single sign-on. Now, the exact process of how SSO works is something that I have covered in pass-through authentication video. Do watch that and you'll come to know what all is required and how exactly the seamless SSO works for a particular user. So now I'll just give my domain admin credentials, and then we'll proceed with the setup. So now everything is configured when it comes to the custom settings that you can do. The moment I will click on install, the first synchronization process will get started. And after the complete sync process, the identities from on-prem will get listed in Azure AD. So right now, if I go back to my Azure AD and if I click on users, you'll only find a couple of users getting listed here. In fact, only one, which is my global admin. But once the sync process is completed, all the on-prem identities will start getting listed here. So what I'll do now is I'll go back and I'll click on install. I'll pause this video for a couple of minutes because it's going to take some time. Once it is finished, I'll come back and resume the video. So now the setup has been completed and I'll click on exit. Now in order to launch Azure AD Connect, you have to click on synchronization service and then you can click on run as admin. And if you by default have the privilege, you can just click on that and the tool would get launched. But if you get a message, some error sort of likewise, this requires admin privilege, then for sure you have to click on right, then you have to select the option of run as admin. Now let's understand what all has happened. So the first process here says that it is going to query all the objects from your on-prem AD and it is showing as add 201. For AAD Connect, for your Azure AD, there is no objects that has to be queried because there was only one cloud account, which was my global admin account, so it shows no objects here. The same process goes for sync and the same process goes for export. Now, how all this work is something that's been covered in architecture video. Do watch that as well. Now let's just quickly talk about the accounts which we discussed. So if I right click here and then I click on properties and then I click on configure directory partitions and if I click on containers, you see this account, the same account which I've shown you in our presentation, that there will be three accounts that will be created. The first one will be for your local AD. The second one will be for your Azure Active Directory. So I'll right click here and I'll again click on properties. I'll again click on configure directory partition or hierarchies, or you can also check it from connectivity. And as you can see, I'm getting this option of sync underscore active directory. So this active directory that you see here will actually be the host name of your machine on which you will be installing AAD Connect. And then the same GUID which is available in the MSOL account. Now there are two more accounts that we have to discuss, and for that I have to launch Active Directory users and computers. And if I go to the computer section, you'll find an account getting listed as Azure AD SSO account. This account is created when you have selected the option of enable single sign-on. And the last object that I have to show you is the AAD account, AAD service account. So if you'll open this account and if you'll see the properties, what you will see, service account for the synchronization service running on computer, your computer name, which in our case is Active Directory. So these are the three accounts which get created, and though I will be creating a different video for that, but then also I'll show you the groups which get created by default by the setup, and these are those four groups. So this was all about the setup process of installation of AAD Connect. Let's say you are facing some issues and your installation is not getting completed just because of some reason. Apart from referring to event viewer, there is one more folder that you can refer, and I'll show you right now, and that is program data AAD Connect. And this folder that you see here will give you the exact process logs, and that too step by step. So if I open my trace log right now, you'll see every step that's been taken by AAD Connect setup will be listed here. So if you came across any issues wherein your username password is not going through or there is any network connectivity issue, whatever issue will be there, it will get listed here. So this is a sort of some information which will help you to troubleshoot as well. So now the last thing which is left to showcase you guys is the kind of objects, that means the source type. So now when you go back to portal, when the sync is completed, you will see Azure Active Directory for those objects which were created from the portal itself, and Windows Server 80 for those objects which are synced from on-prem to Azure Active Directory. So this was all about this particular video. We have discussed about installation of AAD Connect. We have discussed about the accounts that are getting created and the program data folder where you get the Azure AD Connect logs that can help you to troubleshoot. In the next video, we are going to talk about managing users with Azure Active Directory, and I'm going to talk about everything that is related to user object. So thank you so much. Thanks for your time. If you have learned something new, please feel free to subscribe. If you have any feedback, suggestion, or query, feel free to reach me at learnconceptswork@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Bye bye.